They didn't mean for the microphone to carry that far. At least, that's what my mother told me later. That it was just a joke. That I was being too sensitive. But I heard every word, and so did 300 other people. It was my brother's wedding reception, June 4 years ago, in a rented banquet hall outside of Columbus, Ohio. White tablecloths, overpriced centerpieces, a DJ who kept playing the same 3 songs. My brother Daniel had married a woman named Courtney, and the whole room was glowing with that specific kind of happiness you only see at weddings, the kind that makes everything feel possible and warm and permanent. My father had asked to give a toast, which, looking back, I should have known was a bad idea. My father and open microphones have never been a good combination. He gets a couple of drinks in him and he starts performing. Not talking, performing. Like the whole room is an audience that showed up just for him. He started fine. He talked about Daniel growing up, about how proud he was, about Courtney being the perfect addition to the family. He was charming, actually. People were laughing at the right moments. My aunt was already crying. And then he paused. He looked out at the room, and he smiled. That slow, satisfied smile he gets when he thinks he's about to say something clever. And he said, "You know, when Daniel was born, I told my wife, this is the one who's going to do something with his life." More laughter. Daniel grinning from the head table. And then my father looked right at me, sitting at table 7, which was not the family table. The family table was table 1. I was at table 7 with my cousin Marcus and a few of Daniel's college friends who I'd never met. He looked at me, and he said, still into the microphone, still smiling, "Our first was always the sure thing, Claire," and he gestured at me, and people turned, and I felt every single set of eyes in that room. Claire was our reminder that not every hand you're dealt is a winning one. He laughed. Some people laughed with him, the uncomfortable, unsure kind of laugh people do when they're not certain if something is a joke or not. My mother, sitting at table 1, did not laugh. She looked down at her plate. Daniel looked at me for exactly 1 second and then looked away. I sat there with the champagne glass in my hand that I didn't put down, because putting it down would have required moving, and moving would have meant acknowledging what had just happened in front of everyone I'd grown up around, everyone who knew me, everyone who was now either staring or very deliberately not staring. I set the glass down. I picked up my purse. And I walked out. Here's what I want you to understand, before I tell you the rest of it. This did not come out of nowhere. I grew up in a house where the rules were different, depending on which kid you were. Daniel was 2 years older than me, and had been, from the time he could walk, the uncomplicated one. The one who did what was expected. Played sports. Got decent grades. Never argued. He had a quality that I genuinely didn't understand until I was an adult. The ability to want the things that were easy to want. He wanted a stable job, a nice house, a conventional life. And my parents wanted that for him too. So there was never any friction. I was friction. Not because I was trying to be difficult. I genuinely didn't understand that for a long time. I thought I was just being myself. I wanted things they hadn't planned on. I wanted to study graphic design instead of business. I wanted to move to Portland after college, not stay 40 minutes from where I grew up. I asked questions at the dinner table that my father didn't like. I disagreed with him about things that he felt a daughter shouldn't disagree about. I was 15 when I first heard the phrase, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" I was 31 when I walked out of that wedding reception. In between those 2 moments, I heard some version of that sentence more times than I could count. What I didn't fully understand until I was older was that my parents weren't just comparing us, they were ranking us, and the ranking had been decided before I was old enough to do anything about it. There's a specific kind of family dynamic. I've learned a lot about it since, from therapy, from reading, from talking to other people who've been through it, where one child becomes what they call the golden child and the other becomes the scapegoat. It's not always intentional. Sometimes parents don't even know they're doing it. But one child can do no wrong, and the other child's ordinary human failures become proof of something larger and more damning. I was the proof. Daniel forgot to call on birthdays. I forgot once, and my mother brought it up for 2 years. Daniel wrecked the car in high school. When I got a speeding ticket, my father said it was evidence of my Pattern. Daniel changed his major 3 times in college. When I chose graphic design, my mother cried, actually cried, and said she didn't understand where she'd gone wrong with me. I don't tell you this to make you hate my parents. I'm not sure I hate them. What I feel is more complicated and less dramatic than hate. I tell you this because you need to understand that my father's toast at that wedding was not a one-time lapse in judgment from an otherwise loving man. It was the most honest thing he'd said about me in 31 years. He just said it out loud into a microphone in front of 300 people. I drove myself to the reception, which was lucky. I didn't have to wait for anyone or explain anything. I just walked to the parking lot, got in my car, and sat there for about 10 minutes with the engine off. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I thought I would, but instead I just felt this strange, hollow quiet, like after a really loud sound stops and your ears are still adjusting. I kept replaying it. The pause before he looked at me. The way he smiled. A reminder that not every hand you're dealt is a winning one. Delivered like a punchline. Like I was the punchline. I drove the 2 hours back to my apartment in Pittsburgh. I did not text Daniel to say I'd left. I did not call my mother. I got home around midnight, poured myself a glass of wine I didn't finish, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and did something that, in retrospect, was both the healthiest and the most destabilizing thing I could have done. I wrote down everything. Every incident I could remember. The birthday thing. The speeding ticket. The time my mother told her friends at Thanksgiving that Daniel was the one who got her brains. The time my father asked, in front of my then-boyfriend, whether I'd ever thought about going back to school for something more practical. All of it. I filled 4 pages of a legal pad. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to be dramatic about it. I wasn't going to send an email or make a phone call or have a big confrontation. I was just going to stop. Stop calling. Stop driving home for holidays. Stop performing the role of the daughter who keeps showing up and hoping it will be different this time. I blocked my parents' numbers. Not out of anger, or not only out of anger, out of a realization that every time I picked up the phone when my mother called, I was agreeing to the terms of something I'd never actually agreed to. And I was done agreeing. I did not block Daniel. I thought about it, but Daniel had looked at me for 1 second and then looked away, and I understood something in that moment that I'd been refusing to understand for years. Daniel knew. He had always known. He just found it easier not to say anything. And that was its own kind of answer. But I wasn't ready to lose my brother completely, so I kept the line open, even if I didn't use it. Here's what 3.5 years of distance looks like when you're not doing it for revenge. I got better at my job. I work in brand design. I have my own small studio now, which I started the year after the wedding. 3 full-time clients within 18 months. It didn't happen because I was free from my family. It happened because I stopped spending an enormous amount of mental energy managing my relationship with people who made me feel like a losing hand. That energy went somewhere else. I started therapy, which I should have done a decade earlier. My therapist is a woman named Dr. Anand, and she has the particular gift of asking the exact question you've been avoiding. In our second session, she asked me, "What do you think you've been trying to prove and to whom?" I cried for 45 minutes. I came back the next week and the week after that. I made friends who didn't require explanation, people who didn't need me to justify my choices or pre-apologize for my personality. It sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. I started going to my cousin Marcus's family for Christmas. His mom, my Aunt Patrice, who had called me the morning after the wedding and said, "I just want you to know I thought what your father did was wrong, and I'm sorry." She didn't make a big thing of it. She just said it. I think I'd been waiting for something like that for most of my adult life. I won't pretend the distance didn't hurt. Some days it hurt a lot. The first Thanksgiving alone in Pittsburgh, I ordered Thai food and watched a documentary about national parks, and I was okay, mostly, except for about 20 minutes around 6 o'clock when I thought about what my family's kitchen probably smelled like right then. The holidays are engineered to make you feel like an exile if you're not in the right place with the right people. But here is what I also know. Every holiday I spent at my parents' house, I came home feeling smaller than when I arrived. And I stopped wanting to feel that way more than I wanted the smell of my mother's kitchen. Daniel called me 14 months after the wedding, not my parents. Daniel. He called on a Sunday afternoon in August, which was unusual enough that I actually picked up. He said, "Hey." I said, "Hey." There was a pause long enough that I started wondering if the call had dropped. Then he said I should have said something. At the reception. I didn't say anything for a moment. I'd spent a lot of time in therapy processing what I would feel if this moment ever came, and what I actually felt was not the release I'd imagined. It was more complicated. Relief and anger and something sad underneath both of those. I said, "Yeah." He said Dad was, "I don't know. I don't know why he does the things he does. I know that's not an excuse." I said, "It's not." Another pause. "I'm not going to apologize for him," he said. "But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry I didn't stand up. I thought about it a lot. I appreciated him saying it." I told him so. We talked for about 30 minutes. Not about our parents, mostly, just about our lives. Courtney was pregnant. He was still at the same company, just promoted. I told him about the studio. He asked the right questions. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in probably 10 years, and by the end of it, I felt like I had a brother again, even if the version of us that existed now was different from anything we'd had before. We didn't talk about our parents at all during that call, or the one after that, or the few that followed over the next couple of years. There was an unspoken understanding that we were maintaining a separate relationship, one that didn't include that third rail. It mostly worked. 3 months ago, my mother called from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up. I pick up unknown numbers sometimes for work, and something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail. When I heard her voice, my whole body went still in the way it does when something unexpected happens. That second of pure suspended time before your brain catches up. She said my name. She said, "Claire, please don't hang up." I didn't hang up. I don't entirely know why. Probably because Dr. And I had spent a lot of sessions talking about what I actually wanted from my family. Not what I was owed, not what was fair, but what I actually wanted. And the answer I kept arriving at was not nothing. It was something more honest and more inconvenient than nothing. My mother said my father had a health scare. His heart. He was okay. She was clear about that. He was okay. It wasn't an emergency. But it had scared both of them. And she wanted to talk to me. I said, "What do you want to say?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I don't know how to say this right." I said, "Say it the way that's true." She said, "I've never," and then she stopped. She took a breath. "I've never protected you the way I should have." And I've told myself different stories about why, but the real reason is that it was easier not to, and I'm ashamed of that. I sat with that for a while. Not because it was a revelation, I'd arrived at that conclusion myself, in therapy years earlier, but because hearing someone say a true thing out loud is different from knowing it. It lands differently, in your chest rather than just your head. I said, "I know." She asked if we could meet, not to fix everything, she said. She wasn't saying that, just to talk. She wanted to see me. I told her I needed to think about it. I called Daniel after I hung up with her. He'd known about my father's health scare. Of course he had, but he hadn't told me because he didn't want to be the reason I got pulled back in before I was ready. He said, "Whatever you decide, I'll support it." But she's different, Claire. Something shifted after Dad got scared. I don't know if it's permanent, but it's different. I spent a week thinking about it. I went to a session with Dr. Anand, and we talked about what I wanted versus what was safe, and whether those two things were in conflict, and what it would mean to put conditions on contact versus no conditions at all. What I kept coming back to was this. I had spent 3.5 years building a life that didn't require my parents' approval, a life that wasn't organized around trying to earn something they'd never actually offered. And that work was real. It existed. A conversation with my mother couldn't undo it, and me refusing to have that conversation also couldn't protect it. I was past the point where they could take the ground I'd built. So I drove to Columbus on a Saturday morning in early April. My mother met me at a diner she'd suggested, halfway between her house and the highway. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner booth, and she looked older than I remembered. Not in a bad way, just in the way that time does to people when you've been absent from their daily presence for long enough. She stood up when she saw me. She looked like she wanted to hug me, and I let her, briefly. We sat down. We ordered coffee. And then we talked, really talked, for the first time in I don't know how long. Maybe ever. She told me things I hadn't known. That she'd grown up in a house not unlike ours, where her own mother had played favorites, and she'd been on the wrong side of it, and she'd spent her whole life trying not to think about it because thinking about it meant sitting with something she couldn't change. She said she'd repeated the pattern she'd been handed without fully realizing it, and that understanding that had been like having a floor drop out from under her. I said, that doesn't make it okay. She said, I know it doesn't. I said, I spent most of my life trying to be enough for you and Dad, and I'm only now figuring out how much that cost me. She didn't argue with that. She didn't explain it away. She just nodded slowly and said, I know, and I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to come home or to pretend. I just didn't want you to not know that I know. We were there for 2 hours. I cried once. She cried more than that. We didn't resolve anything, really. There's no resolution to offer, no grand repair to announce at the end of a story like this. My father and I haven't spoken yet. That might come, or it might not. My mother and I have had 2 more short phone calls since April, both of them careful, both of them honest in the way that things can be honest, when people are paying attention to every word. I am not writing this to tell you that families can always be fixed, or that forgiveness is owed to anyone, or that time heals all wounds if you just wait long enough. I don't believe any of those things in their simple forms. What I believe is this: I had to leave before I could figure out who I was when no one was telling me I was a losing hand. And I had to do that for long enough to actually build something. Not just recover from the wound, but build, actually build. Something that was mine. And only once I had that did I have anything real to bring to a table other than the old, exhausted need to finally be enough. I'm 34 years old. I own a studio. I have a life I chose. I have a brother who is finding his way to honesty and a mother who is finding her way to something harder than honesty, accountability. And I have a father who's scared himself into a health crisis and still hasn't picked up the phone, and I've made a kind of peace with the fact that that might be all he's capable of. The last thing my father said to me in a room full of people was that I was a losing hand. I've been thinking about that differently lately. Because every card player knows the hand isn't fixed until you decide how to play it. I'm still playing. I've thought a lot about what actually changed me, not what hurt me. I could list that in my sleep. But what changed me? It wasn't the night I walked out of that reception hall. It wasn't even the 3.5 years of silence. It was something quieter than both of those things. It was the slow, unglamorous work of deciding that I was going to stop organizing my life around a verdict other people had issued about me before I was old enough to appeal it. My father called me a losing hand in front of 300 people, and for a long time, longer than I want to admit, I carried that like it was true. Not consciously. I didn't wake up every morning thinking, I am worthless. It was subtler than that. It was the way I over-explained my choices to people who hadn't asked. The way I worked twice as hard to prove something to clients who already trusted me. The way I flinched, internally, every time someone compared me to someone else, waiting for the comparison to go the wrong way. That's what words do when they come from the people who are supposed to be your foundation. They don't just hurt. They install themselves. And you spend years not even realizing you're still running on someone else's code. What I know now, and this took me therapy, distance, and a lot of uncomfortable honesty with myself, is that the people who diminish you are almost never doing it because of who you actually are. My father didn't call me a losing hand because I was one. He did it because he'd spent his whole life needing to be the smartest, most certain person in any room. And I was the child who kept asking questions he couldn't answer without feeling threatened. My mother didn't fail to protect me because I wasn't worth protecting. She failed me because she'd been failed the same way, and facing that would have meant facing herself. None of that makes it okay. I want to be clear about that. Understanding why someone hurt you is not the same as excusing it, but understanding it is what allowed me to stop taking it personally in the way that was eating me alive. The way where you internalize someone else's damage and start treating it as a reflection of your own worth. The 3.5 years I spent away from my family were not wasted time. I know some people would look at that and see stubbornness or drama or an inability to forgive. What it actually was, the first extended period of my adult life where I got to find out who I was when no one was telling me I was wrong for being it, that is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Daniel found his way to honesty. My mother found her way to accountability. Neither of those things happened because I waited patiently for them to change. They happened because I left, built something real, and came back, if I came back at all, on my own terms. There's a version of this story where staying would have felt like loyalty, but staying, for me, would have been surrender. And surrender has a cost that compounds quietly until you can't afford anything else. I'm still playing the hand, and it turns out it was never the hand that was the problem.